I just made an insane Wyvern 13 one-shot, and here's what it looks like. First and foremost, as you can see, we have the usual suspects for characters that you might see in a Wyvern 13 one-shot. We have our favorite maid, Rem. We have the useless male main character in Adventurer Raz. And then we have the side characters who kind of do stuff but don't really do stuff. Yeah, that's Conqueror Lilias and Ken. I'll go into showing how exactly the run works and showing off the stats of each character, but let's just see what a run looks like first.
Not fear death. Seizing victory is seizing the future. I'll make you kneel before me. No destiny can stop me.
Okay, so this time let's break down exactly what happens and why everyone needs to be the way that they are, the speed tuning, etc, etc. Okay, so as we boot into the fight, the first thing that you'll see is that we have Conqueror Lilias. Conqueror Lilias is a Moonlight 5-star, but most people have this character if you selected her off of the different headhunt and selector events that we've had. That being said, she shouldn't really be forced or restricted to Hunt 13. So in case you're wondering, oh my god, wait, but like I don't want to have to build my Conqueror Lilias like this during permanently set aside for PvE. Oh my god, I'm gonna lose an RTA because of this. Don't worry, pause. This is a team that you'll only be using during a hunt event, so all is well, don't worry about it. This is only temporary. So Conqueror Lilias, first and foremost, wants to apply Vigor to her team, which is great because you obviously needed a little more damage. Normally you would have an attack buffer like Sinful Angelica or General Purgus in order to clear the first wave with these characters. However, Vigor is good enough, and her using skill 3 does two things. The first is obviously give us more stat because of Vigor, and the second is that it puts her skill 2 and her skill 3 on cooldown. What that means is that for the next wave, she'll have access to her dual attack, which it doesn't really matter which character she drags, but if she happens to drag Rem with her skill 1, this is kind of a shoo-in, and the run is completed way faster. However, we're getting ahead of ourselves. In all actuality, Conqueror Lilias is just gonna press S2 and nothing happens here. The next thing that happens is that you have Adventurer Raz, who naturally is going to press skill 3. It's a full damage Adventurer Raz, and the point here is to give us damage, and it is also to put his skill 3 on cooldown so that you have access to his dual attack on skill 2. And finally, we have Rem, who, kind of similar to Adventurer Raz and Conqueror Lilias, they all want to get rid of their skill 3 so that we have access to the defense breaks, or we have access to demon mode. We have something special waiting for us after we use our skill 3. In Rem's case, this is having access to attack buff and demon mode for one turn so that when we get the drags and all the duels, Conqueror Lilias, Adventurer Raz, Ken, we're going to be doing a lot of dual attacking, and Rem is going to have as many buffs as possible so that she can do a load of good for the team. Great. Okay, so once we actually fight the Wyvern, something you'll notice here is that Ken has to be on Durandal so that he cuts up, and he does have to be squishy enough that he can get pushed up via Durandal, which, in case you aren't familiar with the artifact, Durandal says that when you're below 75% health, your character gets pushed up by anywhere between 8 and 16%. This is going to change and will be much easier once the change to Durandal comes out with the balance patch. However, all we really need is at least one proc from Durandal in order to cut the Conqueror Lilias with the Ken. And our Ken also has 200 effect resistance, which again, we'll go into a little bit later once we see it. Now, as for why we have Ken here, as you can see, he has Vigor, which means that if he uses his skill 2 here, it is a guaranteed defense break. No questions asked, no RNG, no nothing. Ken S2s, and with the addition of his EE, Rem gets to use her skill 1, and while she's under demon mode and has attack buff, this does a load of damage, as you can see here. That basically did half of his health bar. Now, you're probably wondering how important the character that Conqueror Lilias drags here is, because unlike Ken or Adventurer Raz, this character doesn't actually drag the highest attack unit. So then that begs the question, how important is dragging Rem here? And can we clear without Rem being dragged? And the answer is yes, of course you can.
The time has come.
As you can see here, we As you saw there, Ken got dragged and it looks kind of bad. However, if you then remember that we have Adventurer Roz, who is naturally going to use his skill 2 here, you can see that another hit from Ren. You see that another hit from Rem when she has attack buff puts the Wyvern at pretty low health, and assuming you have equal to or a better Rem here, you either clear on the run or you can clear it in this next Rem S1, which is still fine. But of course, as you can see here, we are overkilling by... But as you saw there, we overkilled by about 50,000. There was still the extra half of the Rem S1 that we had to deal with, but that's the general gist of the run. There are some things to note about this team. Number one, I understand that there is a Conqueror Lilias in ML5, and I understand that there is a Rem. However, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm PSAing this is a team, and all hunt one-shot teams are really things that you should only have during a hunt buff. So whether or not you're going to lose your character should not really be up for questioning. It's just for one day. You'll live without playing RTA or Arena for one day. I promise you that it'll be doable. The second is that in case you don't want to use Adventurer Roz, there is a variation of this team where you get to technically lose a little bit more damage on the Wyvern in phase 2, but you do get to clear the first wave a little bit easier with an SSB. However, if you don't have SSB, which is the reason why I tried this with Adventurer Roz, I tried to build this team without as many limiteds as possible. Recently, a lot of people have been using Ken for Rift, so that is a character that a lot of people have. Then a lot of people also have Rem, who, despite being, I don't know, okay for several seasons in RTA, she always ends up being in Wyvern 13 because, honestly, it looks better here. Anyways, in terms of the last character, most people should have Conqueror Lilias, so that shouldn't be that big a deal. But that brings us to the most important part of the fight, which is, of course, gearing and what do you need to look for when it comes to building this team. Okay, so the first character we have is, of course, the star of the show. It's the Rem. Okay, so unfortunately, for those of you that want to replicate the exact way that this works, you do kind of need Rage Set. Now, a couple things to note if you decide to not use Rage Set, you will be able to clear the first wave easier because obviously I have Rage Set and this team is tuned so that even if Conqueror Lilias doesn't land any attack debuffs or attack downs on the first run, she still clears. Rem and Adventurer Roz still clear even without any of the attack down buffs. So in terms of value, if you have Destruction Set or Attack Set or Speed Set instead on your Rem, technically speaking, your first wave should be a little more consistent. However, of course, that means that your second wave, which includes one-shotting the boss, which is the main thing you're going to be doing, it should be a little bit more difficult. It is a little more dicey. You might need something like the Wyvern to take a turn, or you might have to clear after the Wyvern has, or you might clear after your whole team is gone. In other words, it might be a little more dicey, it might take a little more time. However, that is okay if you're okay with a bit of a longer run. Now, in terms of why Rem is specifically built like this, a couple things to note. Pen set is always nice in terms of having damage, but that doesn't affect her S3, and this Rem is kind of a greedy Rem because it just focuses on getting as much damage on the turn 2 or on phase 2 as possible. The next thing you'll notice is that while we do have 4k 300 and some change for enough damage to one-shot the first wave, we do have 85 crit chance because Rem is water and all the mobs are fire, but the speed is actually something that I found to be extremely important. Now, the speed is important because you want to go ahead of all the Wyverns, and also if you're too slow, you might outspeed Ken, which is also a problem because Ken is going to need to get pushed up by Durandal. That being said, 184 speed is the absolute bare minimum, and if you want to go Destruction, Attack Set, or something in between, you obviously can. Just make sure that Rem goes ahead of them. In terms of best in slot artifact, she always wants Daydream Joker because that does the most damage. If you want to mess around with other stuff, you can, but I highly doubt that Rem is going to do any more damage than she already can, or you might encounter other issues if you start running stuff like Portrait because you're trying to focus on clearing the first wave. Overall, if you feel like you need to take Rem off of Daydream Joker, it might mean that you just need to make Adventurer Roz stronger, or you might just have to switch to the Seaside Bologna variation. The next character we have on this list is Adventurer Roz, and while I memed him being the useless main character of an anime, he does actually play a really important part in this fight. First and foremost, he is our guaranteed dual attack with Rem that gives us an additional hit onto the Wyvern. He does serve as the stat compensator for Rem, so in case if you end up not one-shotting the first wave, you should add as much damage onto Adventurer Roz as you can. He should also be above 184 speed. As you can see, he's 185. He has Symbol of Unity because the damage really is important, and the damage is so close on the first wave when it comes to this variation as opposed to the Seaside Bologna variation that I had to even give him Torrent. Destruction Torrent is no joke. It is a lot of value and there's a lot of damage that you get out here. However, in terms of value, his skill 3 is doing anywhere between 7.5 and 8,000 damage. An important side note about this character, make sure that his memory imprint is self-concentrated, self-imprinted, it's concentrated. You don't want to give too much HP to the Ken because obviously you want him to drop below a certain threshold. Aside from that though, you can almost think of building Adventure Roz just like building Rem. You want as much damage as possible and you don't really care about effectiveness, you don't care about ER, you don't care about anything like that, even HP, you just want to do as much damage as possible. And I know technically Roz gains some damage, I think, from scaling on HP, but this build is what I found to do the most damage, so this is what we're rolling so that we can one-shot the first wave. And on a final note, he does do decent damage when it comes to the S2 on a defense broken Wyvern 13 boss. So he ends up doing anywhere between, I think, 16 to 17,000 on the S2. All this damage is kind of important or helps a lot when you're adding up all the numbers in your head. So don't sleep on him. Make sure he has enough stat and make sure that he's 184 speed and obviously 100 crit chance. Okay, now obviously this is going to look really goofy, but as you can see, I have a 3.3k attack, 232 crit damage, Conqueror Lilias with Warhorn. So something to note about this character is that this is probably one of the easier characters to build for this fight. It doesn't really matter how much damage she does because in all honesty, Rem and the phase 2 of this fight is much easier than the initial 5 seconds of phase 2 and all of phase 1. And the reason why I say that is because Conqueror Lilias' speed here is kind of whatever. Her damage and her overall impact is not that high. She puts up vigor, she does some damage. I think she does about anywhere between 6,000 to 8,000 damage, but that is nowhere near as complicated or as difficult as getting the stats on the last 2 characters that I just mentioned. Warhorn is obviously great because you get the 10% attack, and while the 10% imprint that I have is really nice, again, if you're lacking on damage or if the skill 3 isn't enough from Adventure Roz, switch to Seaside Bellona. Her stats are literally the exact same, 184 speed, 100 crit chance, and unless if you want effectiveness on the Seaside Bellona, just run her full damage, you'll clear just as fine. Now in terms of why she's at 200 speed, and to nerd out just for a little bit, I did some of the calculation as to how much you can speed RNG, and technically speaking, if I want to have the best chance of my Ken cutting with Durandal and having the Conqueror Lilias and stuff, I should technically be 195 speed because I have a 174 speed Ken, and that's exactly how much. This is a lot of mathing and a lot of nerding. Long story short, in terms of the 5% speed RNG, 174 speed is the exact speed that I need in order to receive 1 push from Durandal, cut and use skill 2 with Ken, and be able to start off the fight with a defense break and have Conqueror Lilias S1 under it. That being said though, Conqueror Lilias' S1 is kind of RNG, so if you aren't able to get Ken to move before Conqueror Lilias, it isn't the end of the world since the duel is random. That being said though, it is nice to have this tuning proper because sometimes you'll have Conqueror Lilias into a Rem duel and it makes the run go faster. In other words, you just have a slight RNG lucky god run where you get to just clear the phase faster. And finally, for probably the weirdest looking character build and role in this team, we have Ken. So in terms of stats, we have a Ken that has 200 effect resistance because we don't want to get pushed back. The 174 speed is enough so that 116% push from my plus 30 Durandal pushes him ahead, and again, once the balance patch comes out, it won't matter. He's going to push out anyway, so if you want, you could probably be anywhere between 150, 140 or something like that later on, which only makes this team better. Again, thank you Smilegate for the Durandal patch. However, in terms of what you actually need with this character, so long as you have the 200 effect resistance, you have Durandal, and you have low enough health and defense that you push, anything works with Ken. That being said though, some word of advice: don't run a chest plate on him. Try and get the 174 speed however you can. Obviously, I have 1 resist set. The pen set doesn't matter. I don't even have crit chance. I don't win or lose based on whether or not I crit with this character. This is just the best stat breakup that I can find. And again, so long as you have the E that gives you the dual attack, you have Durandal so that you push, and you have 200 effect resistance at anywhere between, again, 173, 174 speed, which is the sweet spot. You won't get speed RNG'd, and again, and I know I sound like a broken record, but something to remember, once the Durandal patch comes out, you will probably need a much lower stat requirement for Ken, which is great. And lastly, let's read the star of the show, the reason why you're even picking this character, his skill 2. His skill 2 reads, attacks the enemy with a series of kicks, decreasing defense for 2 turns before granting the caster increased speed for 2 turns, and triggering a dual attack from the ally with the highest attack. When the caster is granted vigor, ignores effect resistance. So, of course, he is not going to be skill 3ing himself. He's going to be receiving Vigor from Conqueror Lilias, who's going to skill 3 before the start of the first turn. And between Advent of Destruction, the exclusive equipment that gives him the highest attack, dual attack, and the fact that this character gets Vigor from Conqueror Lilias from the first turn, this is a surefire, more guaranteed defense break. You don't have to just assume that if Rem hits enough times, she'll defense break. This is a very, very consistent one-shot. There's not much RNG to it. The only RNG, I guess, and you know what, this is the biggest flaw, and I understand if you think the hunt is worse because of it, it's your gear. That's all the RNG that there is to this team. I'll run down a few common questions you'll probably have about this team and answer them very quickly. Number one, Rem and A-Roz's speed doesn't matter that much. In terms of the run that I have, Rem or A-Roz can go. It doesn't matter. They're both going to one-shot. You aren't really getting demon mode or anything, so you aren't technically guaranteed a debuff anyways. But if you're kind of concerned about the speed tuning and you want to maximize efficiency, technically speaking, Adventurer Roz going first does allow his skill 2 to go off first, and sometimes you could one-shot the Wyvern before Rem even needs to take a turn, just because Roz's S2 and the S1 from Rem does way more than enough damage to one-shot, and it saves you some time on a run. But that being said, having that much speed tuning and having that much freedom in terms of stats is pretty excessive. I don't really know how you're gonna afford that. It's kind of scary for me. I don't have the gear. If you're better than me, then it is what it is. Thank you. Show off your gear in the comment section. The second question that you probably have is, can I clear the first wave without the attack down? And as I mentioned before, yes, the attack down from the first wave obviously helps for Rem's damage and her having rage. However, whether or not it's possible for a rage Rem in order to one-shot the first wave, it is absolutely possible for Rem to one-shot the first wave. If you still want to keep her on rage and still want to one-shot the first wave, another way for you to keep everything that I have intact, but just change a minor thing in order to clear the first wave, is to just give your Rem Torrent set. Yes, you might do less damage to the Wyvern himself, but if you are able to one-shot the first wave and that's the thing that's gating you, try Torrent set instead of Pen set. Anyways, guys, that's what I consider to be probably the most consistent Wyvern 13 one-shot that I have now. If you don't have a triple Torrent Strays, if you don't have all these other funny units for some weird one-shot, and you still want a team that clears in about, I think, 45 to 50 seconds on 2x mode, this is it. Now, of course, you're not going to have this built all the time. It's only going to be during hump buffs, but I find this team to be extremely interesting. It's kind of cool. I like the stats. I like using Adventurer Roz instead of Seaside Bologna, but as I mentioned, that's also a variation that you can try. Anyways, guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed, make sure to like, comment, turn the notification bell, subscribe. Let me know what you think about this Hunt 13 one-shot. Happy hunting for everyone that's doing it right now during the hump buff. Maybe you're doing Rift, maybe you're saving up for Adventurer. I don't know, maybe you're doing Alter. Let me know. Anyways, guys, make sure to check out the rest of my socials. Thanks for watching so much. I'll see you all in the next one. Adios.